I will not talk about theological theme. I regret it, but when I saw the title of the conference, I thought that it was a unique occasion to talk about the creation, the invention of the fount of knowledge. I don't want to answer to the question if the fount of knowledge exists, let's say, in the text, in the mind of John of Damascus. Maybe it did. What I want to show is how it came up in the 18th century, in which context, and maybe why it was published in that way. So I apologize also for my English, which is awful, you know it already, all of you. I wanted to write the text, but I did not find the time, so I will talk like that by my own, and perhaps I hope that you will understand something. So let's start. Well, 1 minute because, yes, okay. So, so this is the front page of the Paris edition of 1712. So it has been printed in 2 volumes, and with a very big prologue introduction by Michel Lequin. I will talk about him right now, and some nice illustrations we do not find then in the Patrologia Greca of Jean-Paul Migne. As we know, Jean-Paul Migne has taken the text of Lequin in his own publication in the 19th century, but it's useful to read the first edition, 1712, to understand the whole project. So we have also some nice images of John of Damascus, the one you see on the right. So what is characteristic in that edition, and why I'm talking about the first, I say the first edition, the Editio princeps of the Fount of Knowledge. This is not because the text was edited, the Greek text was edited in the first time. We know that the Greek text was already edited at that time, it had already some editions. And of course, we had also the Latin translations, which had many editions at that time. What was new in this Lequin's edition is not only that he was really, he tried to make something which was close to a critical edition, but also that he innovated in some way, putting the 3 parts of the fount of knowledge together. In a way, it was, let's say, somehow arbitrary. Himself decided, as we will see, that he had to do that. And as you see in the index, in the contents table of this first edition, we have at the beginning, you see, Capita Philosophica sive Dialectica, De Heresibus, De Fide Orthodoxa, all together, all put together, under the title of Scientia e Fonts. You see this on the left of my slide. And the same thing on another page at the beginning of the edition, when we see Sanctis Ioannis Damasceni Opera Philosophica et Theologica, Pii Gnosios Fons Scientiae. So this title appears for the first time in this edition, because we had, of course, the single titles, but we did not never have this fount of knowledge. So this, of course, has to be, Lequin tries to explain why he did that, and we have this in his preface of the Dialectica, for example. At the first page, we have this text, which I translated as I could in English, so I will read it in English. So I'm quoting Lequin. In any case, one must ask why those illustrious men who published the works of John Damascene in multiple editions reversed the series and broke up the treatises that were bound. So he considers, of course, that at the beginning, as said in the letter of to Cosmas of Mayuma, we all know, why these texts, which was a whole thing, a whole work, why the editors wanted to cut it and reverse the series, and broke up the treatises that were bound. So he poses that these were bound. The Greek copyist, having made this choice a long time ago, it happened that the authentic redaction of the tripartite work had almost disappeared. So the idea is that already in Byzantine time, this ensemble was broken by copyists, and this is why the editors did not find it when they wanted to edit the text. However, through chapter 2 of the Dialectics, but also the Vita of the author written by John of Jerusalem, we will see now that it's something a little bit problematic. He considers that in the Vita there is also already an indication about the fact that there is a whole tripartite work. Maybe this is not in this Vita. We will see that immediately. And the Vatican manuscript that Leo Alatius quotes in his Diatriba de Ioanne Damasceno, we learn that the title of this work was Pigi Gnosis, the Fount of Knowledge. These three treatises were probably written by the Damascene after the others. So he considers that it's at the end of his life that he wrote the three treatises. But I have judged it right to place them before all the others, first of all because of the excellence of the book on the Orthodox faith, which, with its many titles, has always been in the highest esteem of theologians of both nations, so Greeks and Latins, but also the dialectics of our author seem to be of such importance that whoever would undertake to read them would be well received, not only in the theology of the Damascene, but also in the theology of all of other masters of the Eastern Church. So I think that he says that these are a good introduction to the whole Oriental theology. Indeed, although the work seems rather long, it collects all the words which the Holy Greek Fathers used, either in their controversies against heretics or in their doctrinal expositions addressed to Catholics. Catholics considered as Christian in general, let's say, would say addressed to Orthodox. But all those words with which the heretics, nourished by the teachings of the pagan philosophers, exploited to the detriment of their listeners and the simple folk. So this is we know all these things, but this is how he presents his choice. So you see, he says we have the Dialectica. Of course, the Dialectica, we know all that in the chapter 2 of the Dialectica, there is this mention of the Pigi Gnosis, Dio Pigi Gnosis onomagesto. And some scholars considered that this title is the title of the Dialectics. So has it to be the title of the whole work? This is something it's difficult to answer, but of course Lequin answers here. You see, Fount scientia triplex opus appellandum est here in the margin. So he quotes also the Vita Ioannis, so it should be the Vita of John of Jerusalem, attributed to John of Jerusalem by the manuscripts. And if you look at this text, this is complicated because in the Greek, you don't see anything about this. You don't see the term pigignosis. You just see την ιεράν βίβλον θεοχάρακτον πλάκα, etc., but no pigignosis. But in the annotations, you have, of course, the interpretation that this should be something like pigignosis, you see, under the edition of the Greek text, which is also by Lequin, that he makes these remarks. Concerning the Alatius manuscript, this I must say I didn't see him, so maybe another time we're going to talk about that. Anyway, let's see now who was Michel Lequin. And maybe this will help us to understand a little bit his own choices. So Michel Lequin was a Dominican, who lived in the middle of the 17th and beginning of the 18th century. So you have his picture there. And he lived in Paris in the convent of the Dominicans of the Rue Saint-Honoré. There were two big convents in Paris, the one in Saint-Jacques, Rue Saint-Jacques in the Quartier Latin, and the other in the Rue Saint-Honoré, which was also a very important place, and which became a very important place also in the French Revolution, because some revolutionaries convened there. So this is why it was destructed after the revolution. So we don't have any remains of this convent, but which was rather important. And here you have the entrance of the convent, and you see in the church, the entrance of the church behind the other buildings. So this was Michel Lequien, a scholar, a Dominican scholar, and also a polemicist. So himself, in his prologue of the edition of John of Damascus works, he says that he is the heir of two other Dominicans, Jacques Goard and François Combefis. So I think that most of us know these two scholars, Jacques Goard and François Combefis. Jacques Goard is very well known from his Ephrologion. He made this edition of the Ephrologion, which even today is very useful to liturgists. He's also the editor of Theophanes, the chronography of Theophanes. François Combefis also is a very important scholar of that time. And among many of his publications, we have also the works of Maximus the Confessor. So Michel Lequien says, so he did not know both men. They were, with Combefis, they were in the same convent of Saint-Honoré, but Combefis had died very few years before the arrival of Lequien. But he inherited of his papers and archives, and he inherited also of papers and archives of Goard. So he pretended to work in their direction. So let's say, but because you see, this are the direct is the direct heritage of Lequien, but there is a more general heritage, and I tried to explain what could be the genealogy of this project of edition of the works of John of Damascus, as Lequien apprehended it when he started his work. So himself, everything I'm going to tell now is something we found in his introduction, but we have also to interpret, because he does not say, I mean, at that time, he probably did not have all the information we now have. So the first phase of this project, we can say that it started a very long time ago with Robert Grosseteste, who was the Bishop of Lincoln in England, and who is a very important scholastic author and theologian, but who also translated 5 works of John of Damascus. As we see here in this table, we have many manuscripts of the Grosseteste's translation. But as you see in one of them, which is the Magdalene College 192, these 5 translations are put in an order, which is something familiar to us, because we have the Logica first, De Centium Heresibus second, De Fide Orthodoxa third, and then Elementa Dogmatica and the letter on the Trisagion. In the other manuscripts, we do not find the same configuration, but in this manuscript, it is there. So I have to remind also to those who don't know well the question of the Damascenus Latinus that before Grosseteste, we had another translation due to Burgundio from Pisa, which was extremely diffused in the medieval world among theologians, but which was not as good as this of Grosseteste. Burgundio's translation had many errors and was not complete, but it became very famous. On the contrary, these of Grosseteste remained in small scholarly milieus. But Burgundio did not translate the whole, the three works we are interested in. So Robert Grosseteste is also the author of a very small text, which is called the Sermo de Philosophis Philocosmis ides amatoribus mundi et philotheis ides amatoribus Dei. So this text is edited in the Lequien edition, but Lequien does not know that it's written by Grosseteste. He considers that it's a Greek Vita of John of Damascus, which has been translated into Latin in the 13th century or 14th century, and that the Greek original was lost. And he considers that this text is a good testimony of the idea of the structure of the fount of knowledge. We now know that this text was written by Grosseteste himself, who probably himself had this project of putting together these three texts of dialectics, the Heresibus and the Fide Orthodoxa, without, though, giving them the title of Fount of Knowledge. So this text of Robert Grosseteste, with other of his translations, but also translations of Burgundio, have been published for the first time by Henricus Gravius. This is Henrik de Graue in the 16th century. And Henricus Gravius himself did not know that Grosseteste was the author of this sermo. He was in fact the source of Lequien. So Lequien reads De Gros, and what is interesting is that De Gros is a Dominican also. And Lequien considers that he is in this tradition of Dominican scholars working on John of Damascus, for instance, which is something we can understand as far as we have this idea of John of Damascus, father of the scholastics. So this is the first phase of the project. You see here, this is, I'm sorry, yes, this, what we see, what Lequien takes from the sermon about John of Damascus, written by Grosseteste and edited by De Gros, is the following. So himself, he does make some small chapters of this sermon. This is Lequien's fabrication. So he makes a small chapter 9 in what we see the following. In what way he composed, so John of Damascus, of course, he composed a whole book from logic, of course, as well as from 100 heresies and as many points of doctrine. So this is written by Lequien. And the following is written by Grosseteste. He says, in his small life of John of Damascus, first of all, beginning with being, I don't know if I translated it well, ab ente, he set forth the questions which among the Greeks were the best and most useful. Afterwards, he reported the babbling of the heretics so that, knowing the lie, we should obey the truth. Later, he published a third book containing the truth of all wisdom, understanding, and pure faith. So you see, what we know from the letter to Cosmas of Mayuma was transformed by Grosseteste in a kind of facts of the life of John of Damascus. So because there is a kind of progression in the work, in the way of writing the book. And this was found by Lequien and presented as the method how John of Damascus composed the whole book, Integrum Librum. So there is a second phase of this scholarly project, and this is a French phase, a completely French phase. So in January 1636, so this is several decades before the edition of Lequien, we have a decision of the clergy of France, which was presided by the Archbishop of Arles, Jean Jobert de Barrot, who himself was a Jesuit. And this decision was about, we can see it, I will show you that now. We have the text here, about the editions of Greek fathers that had to be produced at that time. So this is the text. You see, for instance, he says, Monseigneur l'archevêque de Toulouse, so this I don't, a conféré ensemble et pris l'avis de quelques docteurs du choix des livres des pères grecs qu'il serait plus à propos de faire imprimer. So what was the choice of books of Greek fathers that would be important to make, to print? Qu'ils avaient jugé que les œuvres de St Jean Damascène, d'Origène, de Maximus et d'Éphrem Cyrus étaient les plus nécessaires, and that they have judged that the works of St John of Damascus, Origen, Maximus, Éphrem, Cyrus were the most necessary entre celles de tous les anciens pour servir à la décision des controverses de la religion, among those of all the ancients, in order to serve the statements of on the controversies of religion. Of course, we understand these controversies are the controversies between Catholics and Protestants at that time. Lesquels néanmoins n'avaient pas été imprimés. These books, they were not already printed in the original language, etc., etc. And so they decided that they had to attribute this project, que l'on pouvait prier Monseigneur de Toulouse de prendre le sieur Aubert, docteur de Sorbonne, pour l'un des deux, que la compagnie l'assit devant prier. So they decided to give the project of edition to Aubert, to Dr. Aubert, who was a doctor of Sorbonne. And then they gave him money to make this edition. So Aubert, Jean Aubert, was the editor of Cyril of Alexandria, the huge corpus of the works of Cyril of Alexandria. He was well known for that. He had in preparation these 6 volumes of Cyril, so which were published in Paris in 1638, and he was the in the best position to make also the edition of John of Damascus. But in order to work, because he needed manuscripts from the Vatican and other informations, the clergy of France asked Leo Alatius, who was very well known, Leo Alatius, who was at that time the librarian of the Vatican library, and who had himself written an important text about John of Damascus, De Ioanne Damasceno et Eius Operibus, so with a status questionis on John. They asked him to send to Dr. Aubert what he had about John of Damascus. Jean Aubert, though, as the clergy, the French clergy says it, This is something we would not like to see that after our death, of course. They said, Mr. Aubert décédé, he died in 1650, que Dieu l'absolve. So please God that he was pardoned for his acts. Il avait de belles qualités, he had good qualities, mais sa paresse a beaucoup retardé l'utilité publique et la satisfaction du clergé en l'édition des prêtres grecs. But he was lazy, and so this is the great French clergy says that he was lazy, and this is why there was he was very late in the publication of Greek fathers. And so the French clergy writes, and this is the Archbishop of Toulouse, writes to François Combefis, the Dominican we saw before, in order to ask him to take the files of Aubert and edit John of Damascus works. You see, les préparatifs que vous avez pour Saint Jean Damascène pourront bien l'illustrer. And he asks also Combefis to see with Goard, who himself was a Dominican, as I said, to see who would publish what at that time, so that the whole files of Dr. Aubert would be published. And they say also that they gave 300 écus to Aubert, but these grants were lost. So the project, as you see, is this. Aubert, then the files of Aubert go to Combefis and to Goard, and then Michel Le Guin takes them in order to work on them. So we have this preparation here by the Dominicans. So yes, so as we said, what was the whole project? So the first thing we can see, and this is obvious, is that we have in this project the idea of a defense of Roman Catholicism against Protestant theologies. We saw, I just quoted this text. So I say it again, that they had judged that the works of St John Damascene, Origen, Maximus, Ephraim, Cyrus were the most necessary among those of all the ancients to serve for the settlement of the controversies of religions. Because, of course, there were points which could be elucidated through John of Damascus' works, but also because, this is written in another text I did not put there, because John of Damascus' works were not only very rich and orthodox, but also they were simple, and as said in another text, even women could read them. So maybe it was already something for me. So Le Guin, of course, he is very invested in this thing of the controversy with Protestants. And in the beginning of his edition, he writes also 7 dissertationes Damascenicae, in which we found 2 of them are pertaining to the points of some points of the controversy. So you see, the 5th of these dissertations is on the homily on those who have fallen asleep in faith, which in fact is a whole discussion on purgatory, because we know that Protestants at that time, Irena Bacchus has written an interesting article that we know that Protestants used this homily in defense of their own thesis. And there is also a dissertation on Azima, which is more generally concerning the question of Eucharist, and of course, the very well-known question of transubstantiation, we all know also. So this is means that Lequien uses to make this apology of Catholic faith against Protestants in these Dissertationes Damascenicae. We have also to say that Lequien himself is very invested in the questions of controversy, because under a pseudonym, which is Stephanus de Altimura Ponticensis, he writes after the publication of John of Damascus, Fount of Knowledge, Contra schisma Grecorum panoplia qua Romana et Occidentalis Ecclesia defenditur, and which is an attack against the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Nectarius, which is, as you know, the predecessor of Dositheos of Jerusalem, Periarchistu Papa. So the text Periarchistu Papa is criticized by Lequien under the name of Stephanus de Altimura, which is a fictive person. And why does he do that? Not because at that time this controversy was probably very old already, because he is in contact with a French Huguenot, Pierre Alix, who is in England at that time. They have very close relations. We have to understand that Lequien is a very curious person. He's on the same time he's writing against Protestants, but he has Protestant friends, and who is talking with them scholarly. And this Pierre Alix writes him, this is a letter I found myself, is not already published. Pierre Alix writes to Lequien the 30th of August 71, and he says, I found a very interesting book, which is Nectarius Periarchistu Papa, and I want to translate it and to edit it. What do you think about it? This is in the letter. And so, of course, Lequien is panicked at that time, because he understands that this is against Catholicism, and he prepares this refutation. In the meantime, the Nectarius of Pierre Alix has been published in 72, so before the edition of John of Damascus. So this is to show you who was Lequien. So there is another reason also. He absolutely wants to edit John of Damascus in a right way, and also in a way that supports the scholastic theology. Lequien considers that Thomas Aquinas has been misguided by Burgundius translation. As we know, Thomas Aquinas quotes many times John of Damascus, but he does not have access to the Greek text. He has only access, or probably not himself anyway, but he has access to Burgundius translation, which, as I said, is not a good translation. And this is the reason why, for Lequien, Thomas had made some errors which he is not responsible for. So he tries to give, let's say, to Thomists, the right text of John of Damascus, so they can better understand the meaning of these quotations, and also give some reason to Thomas Aquinas, who, as said, was misguided by the first translation. So it's a kind of apology of Thomist thought, and he says that Pietrus Lombardus and also Thomas, they did not understand everything from John of Damascus, and this is a pity, because they did not have access to the right text. So this, I think, is something we have to think about, because these Dominicans, many of them were involved in the edition of the text. And finally, There is another reason why he's so involved in John of Damascus edition is it's because himself he's extremely interested in the hierarchies and in the let's say the organization of the churches of the East. Considered from the point of view of Rome, of course. Himself, Lequien is the author of a huge book in 3 volumes, Oriens Christianus in Quatur Patriarchatus Digestus, which gives the whole this, and it's a work which used even today for some of these sees. And himself, he is in contact, of course, with many Greek ecclesiastics, for instance, Chrysanthos Notaras or Meletios Tipaldos in Venice. They are in contact, they have correspondences, and he's preparing this book. So he's really interested in Oriental studies, and we have also to say that Lequien has a knowledge of Arabics, of Hebrew, and other Oriental languages. So himself, he's also an Orientalist. Finally, and this is something, I don't know if this is something, something peculiar, something that has to be noted, but the whole work of the edition is dedicated to Jean-Paul Bignon, which of course is a very important person at that time. He's the preacher and librarian of the King Louis XIV. But he's also the author of a piece of writing called, anonymous piece of writing called Les Aventures d'Abdallah, which was a bestseller of that time. And as you see, this book was published 1712. It's exactly the same year as John of Damascus, edition of the Fount of Knowledge. And Bignon, so we are in this whole climate of Orientalism. And of course, John of Damascus is of Greek father, of Oriental origin. And himself, a few years ago, I wrote an article about that. This is something also peculiar. It's not, I think that it has nothing to do with theology. We had a piece of classical drama with as main figure of the drama we had John of Damascus, who himself appears, of course, as a martyr he was, but who was also in contact with Abdallah, who is, of course, the Caliph of Damascus, etc. So there is this whole story. And this piece was brought on scene, probably when Lequien was still a child. So we have this Oriental figure of John of Damascus, which exists also and is a reference at that time. So this is what I had to tell you. I hope I did not see the time. Maybe it's, yes, a little bit long. I have been a little bit long, but thank you for your attention. And so.